and we're plugged in with Maura Collins, and I am here with Robyn. Hi, Robyn.
Hi.
Robyn Anonymous. I love it. It's like the best name ever.
I thought long and hard about it because I wanted people to hear my message without necessarily putting myself so much into it.
Is that recovery based, or just because that's just the way you want people to see you as an author, or just a friend or figure or someone in a meeting or whatever? Just now it's just kind of become your thing? Or
I think recovery is what inspired it, but truly I have a message that I don't want to be watered down by me giving my last name. And I know myself, being rigorously honest is difficult. And if we attach my last name to it, I have a feeling that my honesty level is going to go down a little bit. So I was able to be raw with some of the things I shared that would be really uncomfortable for other people more so than me.
it's funny you said that, because when I decided to do this podcast, my mother said, "Be careful what you say." It was like a disclaimer when your mom's saying that, but this is my truth. This is me. You know, it's about other people and reaching people outside of recovery in a different way. Maybe people who have family members that are addicted or have different kinds of addictions, or just people that want to learn a little bit about self-care, self-love, the topics that you are so inspiring on. And, you know, I'm not ashamed of who I am. And sometimes my truth is a little raw and a little comes from left field a little bit, but I wouldn't change my story. So when did you decide that you, or just, you know, have this dream or vision to all of a sudden start writing books?
You know, I wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little girl, honestly. But, you know, I grew up in a place that, you know, that just wasn't heard of, right? I grew up very poor, very poor. And my parents just wanted me to graduate high school. And if I accomplished that, that was going to be the best thing that ever happened to my family. So, you know, I dabbled with writing on and off throughout my life. But when I came into recovery, I just had so much to tell. And, you know, it's interesting. If somebody would have ever told me that I had to write in a journal, I would have absolutely fought them every step of the way. But I remember going to a meeting and I heard someone say something that was so profound that I reached in my purse and I wrote it down on the back of an envelope, because that's how we did it in my family, right? And then I went to another meeting and someone said something profound, so I pulled it out and I wrote it down on there. And before I knew it, I had so many different notes, I ran out of paper in my purse and thought, you know, I should probably grab one of those journals on my bookshelf and write some notes in it. And that's what I did. And then before I knew it, I was making lists, writing notes, I was writing poetry. And then I was writing little short thoughts, and those thoughts got bigger. And then I thought, you know, it would be really great if I started a blog, because then I could keep track of all of my thoughts and I don't have to worry about it being messy, because I can always edit. And, you know, I put little things in place to make sure that I would do this blog every day. You know, I think when I first started, no one even knew I existed. And then before I knew it, people started following me, and I didn't know how they even found me. And I was so excited that I had these little subscribers who wanted to hear what I had to say. So in my mind, my ego took off, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have to make sure that my blog is out every day by this time so that my followers can get my message. And I'm telling you, it was like 3 people. But those 3 people were so important to me. I needed them to know what I was thinking today, you know? And it kept me going. And before I knew it, I had so much material that I thought, you know, what about putting this into a book? And my first book was born, and I did a poetry book. From that, I was really taken and decided that I would do my second book, which was a little bit of my story, and that's the No Longer Thirsty. And that is, a lot of people think it's just about, getting sober or getting clean. And it's really about, I'm no longer thirsty for any of that nonsense that I used to be. And then that, of course, inspired me to write 2 more during the pandemic. So, it just kept going.
So people were going through what they were going through during the pandemic, and you embraced it as a time to sit down, you must have gotten God-centered times 10 and just inspired to write 2 books during the pandemic.
During the same year, yeah. So it's funny. I read some books in the different fellowships that I attend, and, I would always find something that didn't apply to me. And I thought, I really want something that applies to me that I can read every day. And then I saw one of those memes because, that inspires me. You get that random meme, and it said that if you don't see something you like, write it yourself. And I thought, yeah, let me do that. So I took on 2 projects at the same time. One is called Today's Soul Advice, and that is my daily devotional, right? So I sit there and I look at it. It's my motivation, and it inspires me to go out there and do something good. It's this one thing that my higher power said to me that I'm supposed to focus on today. And the other one is 365 Reasons. And I thought, what better time to focus on gratitude than when the whole world seems to be falling apart around me? And I took one thing every day and I wrote not only what I was grateful for, but why. And of all of the things that I've done, that one really hit me in a spot that I didn't expect, because all my life I thought my childhood was so terrible. But when you focus on what you're grateful for, and you have to think of 365 things that you're grateful for, I managed to have memories from my past that I'd long forgotten until I thought about why I was grateful for something. It gave me so much joy, especially in the editing part of the book, right? I remember editing, and I was telling my friend, I'm like, I can't believe I edited 90 days at a time. I feel like I'm high. I said I should probably put a disclaimer on this that says, only read as directed once a day, because if you do more, it may cause a feeling of euphoria.
And that's what this does for me. It's
Nice.
euphoria. When I drive home from the studio, it's like this natural high I've never, ever felt. And I'm in therapy. I started back in therapy probably a little over a month ago. And my therapist told me, Maura, this is the euphoria that you need outside of work and recovery. This is your calling to, that's going to make you feel good inside, give you that positive insight. So one of my friends who, I don't know if you're an introvert or an extrovert, from what I've known of you, you seem a little bit more introverted. In a good way, though. In a good way. But someone that I know that is a very good writer, her name's Janet, she sent me a text that gratitude is magic. What do you think of that?
I agree. It absolutely is magic. It just, when I get up in the morning and I think about what I'm grateful for, how can anything else really affect me that way? It's one of the things that my mentor told me in the very beginning. She used to tell me every time I would get sad that I had to make a list of 25 things I was grateful for. And I thought that was so ridiculous. And I remember in the beginning, I didn't realize the power, so I would put it off. But once I did it and realized the power, well, I realized that I would do gratitude all the time.
I love that. And when I second time I met you, maybe third time, and I'd seen you, we were in a meeting and I was having a hard day. You came up to me after the meeting and I wrote it down. You told me to try to live in today, that I can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. And I already lived through the past, and that's gone. And sometimes when I'm helping someone, I say, you're worrying about stuff that's going to happen in 2 weeks. It's going to come anyways. Just live in the moment, live in the day. And that resonated with me. Thank you, by the way.
Oh, my pleasure.
I had to call my sponsor and be like, oh my gosh, this Robyn girl. And she's like, oh yeah, I know who she is. She told me this, and I think of it as a just for today, one day at a time program, in recovery. But when I'm thinking about outside being plugged in, it is just for today life. Like, why am I worried about everything else that's going to happen to me anyways, or because I work from home and I'm by myself all day, it's easy to get stuck in the stinking thinking in my head because I have that disease of the mind, right? So, you know,
I think that until I learned to live in today, I heard it a lot, but I didn't understand it. And I didn't understand that the only way to live in the day was first I had to get up in the morning and I set my intentions for the day, right? I do my meditation. I don't really plan out my day, but I have an overview of what I need to get accomplished during the day. And then I pray and ask for guidance on what to do. And then I just kind of listen throughout the day to see where my higher power is going to send me to do something, right? I don't necessarily think of it as a good deed, but where can I be helpful today? And sometimes it sneaks up in spots you don't expect it to. And at the end of the day, I think to myself, what is it that I did today that I did really well? What am I really happy about? And what is it that I wish I would have done differently? And how could I do it differently if I get this opportunity again? And then I make amends for whatever it is. So if it's to make a plan of action, to call somebody and say, I'm sorry, whatever it is, I do it before I go to bed so that at the end of the day, this day is done and tomorrow I get to wake up fresh again. I don't carry stuff from yesterday because there's nothing I can do about it after it's done. And I don't worry about tomorrow because, well, what am I going to do about it? I might not even wake up tomorrow.
what subjects were the hardest for you to write about when you had to go through your story in your first book? Well, not your first book, that's poetry, but your first real book that talked about your journey. Like, was it codependency? Was it relapse? Was it heartbreak? Was it pain or grief?
Ugh.
What was the hardest subject for you to have to really talk about?
Relationships.
Oh.
Relationships were my undoing. You know, when I came into recovery, I didn't think I had a drug or alcohol problem. I knew I had a problem with the man I was dating because he was in a, it was a very difficult relationship and it was very toxic. And, you know, I got stuck in relationships like that. So it was really hard to write about it. It was really hard to get through it. And honestly, when I was doing the editing before I put it out, it was probably the most painful part of it, reading it. And it's interesting, when I was doing it on my own, it wasn't as hard as when I read it to someone else. I just broke down crying. I was like, I can't believe I'm crying. I didn't cry the whole time. But it's interesting when you put it down on paper and then you make it real by telling someone else that you're going to share this with the world. You've got all that, what are they going to think of me? Or why on earth was I so ridiculously naive? And why did it take me so long to figure out that I was the problem?
Wow, you just took ownership of that.
Yeah, well, I am the problem, right? Until I learn to do things differently, this is how my life is going to be. That's just it. I don't have anyone else to blame for what goes on in my life. I tried the blame game for most of my life, but blaming people doesn't solve the problem. There's only so long I can hold my parents responsible for not being good parents, or how long I can hold my boyfriend or my husband responsible. I mean, after you grow up and move out of the house, it's really time to start changing, right? Once you end that relationship and move on, you know, you don't necessarily have to carry those same bad habits into the next relationship. But I never took time to heal between relationships. So even though I had multiple relationships, it was the same relationship over and over and over again. Just a different person in the starring role or the leading role.
So how did living the spiritual principles help? Or how do they help?
Changes my whole life. So before I respond to anything, I think about it, because my natural, normal state of being is not one that most people appreciate, right? I had to learn how to stop being in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, because I was always ready no matter what. It was a struggle to be patient, tolerant, loving, kind. I didn't have friends. I really didn't like them. I thought they're just always going to want something. Now I realize that I cheated myself out of so many amazing experiences because I was too afraid to be hurt.
Who influences you or inspires you? Whether it be a book author or famous person or someone that you just admire, musician, could be anyone. Like, not just in your writing, but just in your living, your recovery, and just there's got to be someone that you just gravitate towards.
Honestly, if I were to say who inspires me, it's God. It's absolutely God. God above everyone. And it's interesting because I've always believed in God, but I never had a relationship with God. And it wasn't until I came to this program that God and I got to know one another, right? Well, God probably already knew me, but I got to know God. And that has been very inspiring. I didn't realize that He'd been talking to me all my life. And I just didn't listen, didn't believe enough that I was worth having that conversation.
So what kind of advice would you give someone that's just struggling and maybe relapsing all the time because they just don't have that relationship that we talk about with their higher power being God or whoever their higher power is? What advice would you give them to kind of get synced up with that, or what's worked for you?
What's worked for me? I've worked with a lot of women, and I've worked with women who struggle with that connection to God. And, you know, I've tried different things, but I'd have to say that just connecting with other people is how it started for me, right? In the beginning, I didn't think about what my higher power would think. I thought, what would my sponsor do, right? What would my sponsor do? And I was like, oh, yeah, she probably wouldn't want me to do that. And, you know, that grew to, yeah, probably God wouldn't want me to do that. I'll tell you what's funny. All the time I saw people run around with those little bracelets that said WWJD, and I'm like, that is so stupid. I don't even understand that. And then it hit me in recovery. Oh my gosh, those people were so smart, right? They had the answer all the time. And that's what I think of. What would God do when I do something? Is that really what God would want me to do? And that's so odd. Sometimes when I talk about God, I still feel funny about it. Here I am talking about God. It's not something I ever expected myself to do.
I set little reminders in my phone to talk to God in case I get so carried away with work or meetings or children or whatever I'm doing that I don't take that time. So do you meditate? Are you a big meditator?
I do meditate. I meditate in the morning, and I reflect on my day every evening. And then, you know, I'm that person that I'm hardly perfect. I even have times when if I'm really in the problem, I will forget that, and someone has to remind me to talk to God. I put things around my house. I have a painting that says pray. I have a little note in my other room that reminds me that God always provides. So I set reminders on my phone to pray and meditate because that's what I had to do in the beginning. And sometimes we can get complacent and forget to do those things.
So do you think that anyone could be a writer if they wanted to, or does it take a specific mindset or talent or inspiration or just discipline, you know?
That one, discipline. I think it takes discipline. And I think that it is overwhelming to think of sitting down and writing a book. But I didn't think of it that way. I sat down every day and I wrote one thing. When I decided to write the Today's Soul Advice and 365 Reasons, what I did is I made myself a promise that every day I would meditate and I would write one thing that I was grateful for, and I would write one thing that was advice from my higher power. And I tried to make them short and sweet because that's the way society is today. They want it now, faster. So I wanted to make it easy to read. But it took discipline to do that every day. Imagine, I agreed that for 365 days in a row I would do this. And I'm not a person that follows through on a project. So the fact that I've written 4 books is amazing, right? But I never went out there and said, I'm going to do this. I said, I'm going to do this today. And then the next day, I'm going to do this today. And I set reminders for myself to do it.
What would you think? Because my mom, she's in a book group and she's always been good at reading books. I'm not as much a reader. I don't sit down and like read books all the time. There's been books I really like, but what if someone got one of your books, like a movie producer or something, or director, and said, I want to make your book into a movie? Oh my God. How would you react?
I don't know. That'd be so...
Like Firefly
wild.
Lane on Netflix.
Yeah,
that was
good.
You know, that was a book.
I don't know. I haven't thought of it. See, for me, I've never really thought about becoming famous. I didn't write books to become famous, hence Anonymous, right? I want people to like my books, and I kind of like being small. Do you know, if I were John Grisham or if I were Dean Koontz, I couldn't sit and talk with the people who read my book and explain to them why I wrote certain things. Or when they say, what was that song that you were listening to? And I can tell them. Or, they tell me how one specific part of the book really touched them. That's not something I think that I would have if I had millions of readers. So I kind of like the idea of keeping it small and keeping it intimate and just knowing it's, what's funny is that I talk to my sponsees all the time and they listen to me and they kind of listen, but when they read it out of my book, for some reason, it seems like it's more valid to them than when I tell them the same exact thing.
Because it's on paper?
I don't know. I'm telling you, it's interesting to see the difference. And when I tell them the story and it doesn't seem to apply, but they read it and they're like, oh my gosh, I read this part of your book and that's so me. And I said, I've told you that story before. She's like, well, I didn't remember that, So I love that I can share that in a book form and that I can refer to it. I've even had people that called me up to do book studies on my book.
Wow.
Right? So we've sat down and done a book study and shared how they've had similar experiences. It was kind of exciting.
I can only imagine how amazing your step work is. It's got to be magic.
It's fun. I love doing step work. That's I absolutely awesome. Do. I cater to whoever I'm with. Though we have one solution to everything, right? Applying those principles, it needs to be delivered to people differently. I don't have everybody who thinks the same way. So, one person, perhaps we do the work in one book, and I have other people do the work in other books. I've even taken books outside of the program, and we've done a study on those books, because what I've noticed is they all kind of say the same thing, right? It's just saying it to a different audience of people.
Which I hope this podcast episode is going to reach some people that haven't read your books yet. That'll go on Amazon and order one. Not that we want your followers to get too big. Me, I love that ego part about, my new episode comes out a certain day, a certain time, and I'm excited and I'm waiting to see who's going to watch it. And I love delivering the content too. I can really, really relate with you. So that being said, what's the hope shot you would give someone that's watching this podcast that's thinking about maybe writing or exploring new ways to look at some books online and stumble upon your books?
Well, I'll tell you that I think that if you want to write a book, if there is anyone who is in recovery, they absolutely can write a book. during the pandemic, I not only wrote my books, but I decided to open up and try to get some of my friends to write. So I created a new website. I went out there and asked everybody to write how they were getting through the pandemic. And then it was like, I felt like all of a sudden I had a newspaper and I put it all together and put it out there. And I was amazed at how many people I know that are amazing writers and have great stories, even in just a small piece. And I think if you just sit down and write your story and write just one thing that you want to talk about each time you sit down, you can put that together and make a book out of it and tell your story. Because no matter what your story is, no matter how many times you've heard a similar story, your story is your story.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Robyn.
My
Much
pleasure.
success. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks.